Okay, in my last video that I did just a day or so ago, I commented on the games that I no longer have in my collection. And one of the games I said that I got rid of was Avalon Hill's Submarine game. But in that video I mentioned that I kept the Battleline version of the game. And at least one person asked what I'd replaced it with. And I mentioned that I was now using miniatures, and that person was curious to see what I had done. So this will be a short video on the game Submarine by Battleline and what I've done to kind of make my miniatures version. But let's take a look at what was included in the original Submarine game from Battleline. Okay, the original game came out in 1976 and had two large boards, so you could do quite large convoy actions. There was a rule book, of course, and it was only 12 pages long. It was quite easy to learn, and I fell in love with the game right away. Avalon Hill, of course, later did the second edition. I had two copies of the Avalon Hill version, so I ended up keeping one of the manuals to the Avalon Hill version, much larger, had different log sheets, but it was more or less the original version with more advanced torpedo tables. This is the original log sheet for the game from Battleline. You can use those or the Avalon Hill ones. You had your charts, which were pretty basic. The Avalon Hill one mainly expanded in the sense that where it had advanced torpedo characteristics for each nationality. This is the original ones: torpedo hit probability table, surface gunfire, anti-submarine attacks, and these tables were perfectly serviceable. The counters were really nice. They were very thick, very thick. These are British destroyers. U.S. destroyers were blue. There are the German U-boats that were in black. Japan was in yellow. And you had a whole mess of merchant ships too. And nifty little torpedo counters and depth charge markers. And there's some Japanese counters. So I'm going to show you why I sort of abandoned this game and went over to miniatures, because this game is perfectly suited for miniatures. Well, let's show you what I did. Now I made up my own little box and called the game The Cruel Sea. And again, it's crude, but it serves its purpose. I made all kinds of player aids for it. Made my own little torpedoes. These are all the ships. We'll zoom in on them soon and show you what they look like. Depth charges and torpedoes. Made these little depth charge markers. And had another style of torpedo, two smaller ones. Anyway, I'll show you those zoomed in and show you what it's all about. Okay, there's a typical convoy setup. Now, I'm not a great painter of miniatures. I'm kind of limited to, well, spray the ship black or gray, add a few details, and you got yourself a convoy. My view is that these are counters to a game. They're not meant to be models. And you could, of course, do different spacing. You could have two spaces, hexagons between ships, or one. And you could spread the convoy out. You had a lot of variability, which I liked. And I'll zoom in closer to show you the miniatures in a moment. Now, I experimented with different sizes of U-boats, but in the end I found that the little wee guys here that occupied one hex suited me the best. And since they were so small, I had to distinguish what the front was and the back, so I made these little wavy lines to show the bow. I later tried getting some larger submarines, but they didn't suit as well. They were larger, they looked perhaps a bit better, but they covered 2 hexes and I didn't really want that. So I thought the small miniatures were the best. I bought these quite a long time ago, so I don't remember the company. I think it was Davco from England, and it's odd that I'm a resident of Canada, and it was actually cheaper for me to buy miniatures from England rather than the United States. I think these are 1 to 3,000, don't remember, and I think a lot of the miniatures were 1 to 2,400, I think, which were a little large. I like to be able to play my games on a single table if possible. Okay, here's a closer view of some of the ships, and I just chose the names from various places that I'd visited in my life, watching footage of Victory at Sea, seeing some of the ships launched. So, and a lot of the names are just made up. So I called that one the San Pablo because of a street that I visited quite often in California, the Oneida. A couple of Japanese names, the Akuta Maru. I made the tankers just generic by putting a T on them. Those are the high value targets. The Mole Louis, the Caribou, tried to get some Canadian names in there. Surabaya. The Liverpool Packet was a famous warship during the War of 1812, and so on. U-boats, well, they're just numbers, right? But of course I chose U-boats we kind of knew from history. U-99, that's Kreshmer's boat. The Wahoo, famous U.S. submarine. U-47, of course. Gunther Preen's. And we wanted to get an Italian boat in there, the Trocheco. I'll show you some of the torpedoes and auxiliary counters. Now again, because of my Canadian background, I wanted to get some of our Flower class corvettes in there. Some of our famous ships, like the Sackville, which still exists today. You can visit it in Halifax. The Agassiz, Skeena, Farnham Castle. Just whatever names I kind of liked. Different classes. Here's a Battle class destroyer. Some of these occupied 2 X's, some occupied 1, like the little flowers. That didn't affect the game at all. There's the Oakville. Thing about the smaller vessels, you could show the turning radius pretty good. So the ship would go forward, turn 60 degrees, forward 60 degrees, and you could sort of understand the turning radius a lot better. And when you got some of the larger destroyers that occupied 2 X's, you could see, these are like fleet destroyers, they show that the turning radius would have been a little bit wider. And I thought that was kind of cool. I made, anyone who's familiar with the game knows that the destroyer would go forward and you could drop depth charges in patterns as you moved forward. And then I had the, well, it's 2, 4, 6, that's the 10 pattern charge. And I had these 5 pattern charge ones too, so I thought they added something to the game. These are the torpedoes. Of course, when the submarines fire their torpedoes, out they'd go. I think they went around 8 hexes or so. And you had various attitudes that the torpedo could hit. So it's virtually, or literally, the game Submarine just converted to miniatures. Later on, I made some fancy stuff, like the star shell radius and stuff. A corvette would fire a star shell, and you could put this little wee marker down to show that the radius that was lit up at night. Then I got into fancy things like, where the torpedo hit. Your ship would be there, and this is backwards here now. Yeah. You put this marker down to show whether the torpedo hit broadside or at the front. And I brought these to the conventions, and they were a lot of fun to play. I later transposed some of the data onto cards from the log sheets. I just mounted them on stiff cardboard, and so these were kind of handy. Each player could have one of these in front of them, and they could study the characteristics of their submarine. I always thought that it kind of livened things up, just to add a bit of color. Now, I haven't played this game, oh God, in 10, 15 years maybe. And I made up cards for the destroyers too. And again, trying to give it a little bit of a Canadian flavor. A lot of people don't know that by, 1945, half the convoy duty was assigned to Canadian ships. Are not really remembered for that. Most of the movies, Hollywood movies, usually show American destroyers, sometimes British, but we don't really get our fair shake in the films, but it's our fault for not making them, I guess. Anyway, that's all I really have to say about the miniatures for Submarine. If you get a chance to buy the game, it's quite good. Oh yeah, I guess I could mention the sonar, the way it worked and stuff. Well, it was just like the game. I could use these little wee sticks to show the cone of the sonar. That was sometimes used. And if the submarine was in the cone, you'd pick them up. I also used at times markers instead. That was often handy. You'd put these little X's down to show the cone, and if the submarine was in the cone, you'd pick them up. That was one way. Another thing that was kind of neat was after a submarine was contacted, you may remember in the original game, the submarine was not actually on the board. You marked them down on a sheet. Later on, I had various levels of contact, so if you picked them up, you put a little contact marker, meant that you had a contact there, not necessarily identified as a submarine. Until you got a firm contact, the service player could not attack it. Also had little speed markers instead of writing down. Writing down stuff always slowed the game down, so I made these full speed markers, and half speed or slow. Just put it beside the ship, and that would indicate what speed the ship is going at. So that's my version of Avalon Hill and Battleline's U-boat. It's easily adaptable to miniatures. Just buy yourself a mess of miniatures, paint them up, and you can play on the original board. You don't have to get one of these Chessex mats. The original board is just fine, except that you're going to have to buy small miniatures. Like I said, I think these are 1 to 3,000. Anyway, that's it for Cruel Sea and Submarine, and thank you for watching.